Between 1939 and 1945, a handful of decisive battles decided the fate of entire nations. Millions of lives hung on outcomes determined in weeks or even days. In the 10th place, the Battle of France compressed the collapse of a nation into just 6 weeks, as German armoured columns shattered Allied defences with speed and surprise. In May to June 1940, the German High Command launched its Blitzkrieg. Instead of attacking the heavily fortified Maginot Line, they threaded panzer divisions through the dense Ardennes, a route the Allies believed impassable for tanks. Guderian's tanks, coordinated by radio and supported by Stuka dive bombers, broke through at Sedan and raced to the English Channel in less than 2 weeks, severing the Allied armies. The British Expeditionary Force and French troops, trapped in a shrinking pocket, were forced to evacuate from Dunkirk. Around 338,000 soldiers escaped by sea, but most of their heavy weapons and vehicles were left behind on the beaches. French resistance crumbled, with entire divisions disintegrating under concentrated armoured assaults. By late June, France signed an armistice and German troops paraded through Paris. The outcome left Britain isolated, facing a triumphant Germany that now dominated the continent from Norway to the Spanish border. The swift, devastating defeat in France marked the first decisive loss of Allied initiative and set the stage for the next battle, the struggle for Britain's survival. Number 9. The Battle of Britain marked the first defeat of the Luftwaffe and the moment when the fate of Western Europe hung in the balance. With France overrun, Hitler's planned invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, depended entirely on crushing the Royal Air Force. Throughout the summer and autumn of 1940, waves of German bombers and fighters targeted Royal Air Force airfields, radar stations and aircraft factories, seeking to wipe out Britain's last line of defence. But the British had a crucial edge. The Chain Home radar network gave early warning of incoming raids, allowing Fighter Command to scramble Spitfires and Hurricanes with precision. On September 15th, known as Battle of Britain Day, the Royal Air Force achieved a 2-to-1 kill ratio, downing more than 60 German aircraft in a single day, while losing fewer than 30 of their own. As losses mounted and air superiority remained out of reach, the Luftwaffe shifted to bombing London in the Blitz, but the Royal Air Force endured. Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely, and Britain remained unconquered, preserving the only Allied base in Western Europe, and setting the stage for future liberation. Churchill called it their finest hour, a moment when the outcome of the entire war truly hung in the skies above southern England. In 8th place, the Battle of the Atlantic was not a single clash, but a relentless 6-year struggle for control of the ocean lifeline that kept Britain, and later the entire Allied war effort, alive. German U-boats hunting in coordinated wolf packs targeted convoys carrying food, oil and weapons across thousands of miles of open sea. At the height of the campaign in 1942, Allied shipping losses soared past 4 million tons, with merchant ships being sunk faster than new ones could be built. Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. Every ton lost threatened starvation and defeat for Britain, and the risk that Soviet aid or any future invasion of Europe would become impossible. The tide began to turn with the breaking of the Enigma code at Bletchley Park, the introduction of high-frequency direction finding to locate U-boats, and the deployment of long-range patrol aircraft equipped with the Lee Light, which illuminated submarines at night. As Allied escorts grew more effective and U-boat losses climbed to nearly 70%, the convoy system held. Securing the Atlantic supply lines made every later Allied offensive possible, from Soviet resupply to the build-up for D-Day, proving that logistics and control of the sea were the backbone of victory in Europe. Number 7. The Battle of Moscow stands as the city that refused to fall. In the autumn of 1941, Hitler launched Operation Typhoon, a massive German push toward the Soviet capital with over 1 million men and thousands of tanks and guns. German forces advanced to the very outskirts of Moscow, their leading units able to glimpse the spires of the Kremlin through the winter haze. But as October turned to November, the Russian winter arrived with full force. Temperatures plunged below -30 degrees Celsius, freezing lubricants, jamming weapons, and immobilizing vehicles. German troops, outfitted for a short campaign, suffered frostbite and hunger in the snowbound forests. Meanwhile, the Soviet High Command, armed with intelligence from Richard Sorge's cables in Tokyo, redeployed entire Siberian divisions by rail, troops equipped and trained for brutal cold. In early December, these fresh reinforcements joined the battered defenders and launched a counteroffensive. The Red Army, using skis and winter camouflage, struck at the German flanks and drove the invaders back more than 100 miles in places. The myth of German invincibility was shattered on the outskirts of Moscow. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht's advance had been decisively checked. The Eastern Front would never again see a German offensive reach so close to its ultimate prize, marking a turning point that would echo through every battle that followed. Number 6. The Battle of Stalingrad is often considered the single most important battle of the war, a clash that turned the tide on the Eastern Front. In the summer of 1942, the German 6th Army, backed by hundreds of tanks and artillery, advanced on Stalingrad, aiming to seize the vital industrial city on the banks of the Volga. What was planned as a swift capture became a brutal siege. The fighting descended into a nightmarish struggle for every street, factory and apartment block, with both sides resorting to snipers, flamethrowers and hand-to-hand combat in the ruins. By November 1942, Soviet commanders Zhukov and Vasilevsky launched Operation Uranus, a massive double envelopment that trapped around 330,000 Axis troops inside the city. Hitler forbade retreat, insisting the Luftwaffe could supply the encircled army by air, a promise that proved impossible as winter closed in and Soviet anti-aircraft fire took its toll. Starvation and disease set in. After months of hopeless resistance, about 91,000 exhausted, frostbitten German soldiers surrendered in February 1943. The destruction of the 6th Army marked an irreversible loss for Germany. From this moment, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front passed permanently to the Soviets, setting the stage for their relentless advance westward. Number 5. The Battle of El Alamein marked the moment when the tide in North Africa turned irreversibly against the Axis. In the autumn of 1942, Rommel's Africa Corps had pushed deep into Egypt, threatening the Suez Canal and the vital oil fields beyond. The British 8th Army, now under Bernard Montgomery, spent months building up a force of nearly 190,000 men, more than 1,000 tanks, and 900 guns. To mask the true strength and location of the coming assault, Montgomery's staff orchestrated Operation Bertram using inflatable tanks, dummy supply depots and fake radio signals to deceive Axis intelligence about where the blow would fall, an exercise in deception. On the night of October the 23rd, a thunderous artillery barrage signalled the start of the offensive. Engineers led the way, clearing paths through dense minefields under cover of darkness. For 13 days, British and Commonwealth troops battered the Axis lines, slowly grinding down resistance. Rommel's own field reports described confusion and surprise as his forces faced attacks from unexpected directions, the result of Allied deception and overwhelming firepower. By early November 1942, Axis defences collapsed and the retreat across Libya began. Churchill famously declared, "Before Alamein we never had a victory, after Alamein we never had a defeat." El Alamein was the first clear Allied ground victory of the war, shattering the myth of Axis invincibility and opening the way for Allied offensives across the Mediterranean. It proved that with superior planning, intelligence and determination, the Allies could seize the initiative and begin to roll back the Axis advance. Number 4, the Battle of Kursk marked the last great German offensive in the east, and the moment when Hitler's armies lost any hope of regaining the initiative. In July 1943, German High Command launched Operation Citadel, aiming to pinch off the massive Soviet-held Kursk salient. Months of Soviet preparation had transformed the region into a fortress. Nearly 1,800 kilometers of minefields, deep trenches and layered anti-tank defenses awaited the attackers. The Germans committed their elite armoured divisions, fielding new Panther and Tiger tanks alongside nearly 900,000 men. but delays ordered by Hitler gave the Soviets time to reinforce with almost 2 million troops and thousands of T-34s. When the assault finally began, German tanks advanced only a few miles before being bogged down by dense minefields and relentless artillery. OKW memoranda reveal mounting frustration as the offensive stalled, with Manstein noting that logistical bottlenecks and Soviet air attacks slowed the deployment of critical armour. The largest tank battle in history erupted at Prokhorovka, where hundreds of armoured vehicles clashed in close combat, but the Germans failed to break through. Within days, the Soviets launched a massive counter-offensive, overwhelming the exhausted Wehrmacht and driving them back across the steppe. Kursk locked the German army into a permanent defensive, crippling its panzer reserves and opening the way for continuous Soviet advances. From this point forward, the Red Army would push west without pause, while Germany's hopes of victory on the Eastern Front vanished for good. Coming to the top three, the Battle of Normandy and D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, opening the long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe. Nearly 160,000 Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, including Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, and were supported by over 5,000 ships and more than 11,000 aircraft. Before dawn, 23,000 paratroopers from American and British airborne divisions dropped behind enemy lines, but heavy anti-aircraft fire and thick clouds scattered many units, leaving them isolated and fighting to regroup. The landings met fierce resistance, especially at Omaha Beach, where American troops faced entrenched German defenders, machine gun nests, and obstacles that turned the sand red. Casualties were heavy. At Omaha alone, over 2,000 were killed or wounded in the first hours. Despite this, by nightfall, Allied forces had secured a fragile foothold. In the weeks that followed, the Allies broke out from the beachhead, racing across the Bulge and liberating Paris on August 25th. Operation Overlord forced Germany into a permanent two-front war as Soviet armies pressed from the east. Hitler's armies could no longer shift reserves freely, and the Western Front became a relentless drain on German strength. The Normandy campaign sealed Germany's fate. From this point, defeat was inevitable as the Allies advanced through France and toward the heart of the Reich. Number 2, the Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate gamble to change the course of the war in the West. In mid-December 1944, as snow and fog blanketed the Ardennes, over 200,000 German troops and 1,400 tanks smashed into thinly held American lines, aiming to split the Allied armies and seize the port of Antwerp. The attack achieved total surprise, driving a wedge nearly 50 miles deep and creating the namesake bulge in the front. Roads clogged with refugees and retreating units, while isolated pockets of resistance sprang up in key towns. At Bastogne, the crossroads town at the heart of the German advance, the 101st Airborne Division found itself cut off and surrounded. When German envoys demanded surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with the single word, nuts. For days, the defenders endured artillery barrages and dwindling supplies as the weather kept Allied aircraft grounded. But on December the 23rd, the skies cleared. Waves of American bombers and fighters pounded German columns, while Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve Bastogne. German fuel shortages and mounting casualties slowed the offensive to a crawl. By late January, the Allies had closed the Bulge and regained all lost ground. The failed Ardennes offensive cost Germany its last reserves of men, armour and fuel. From this point, the Wehrmacht was no longer capable of mounting a major attack in the west, and the road to the Rhine, and ultimately Berlin, lay open. And finally, in first place, the Battle of Berlin was the violent, devastating conclusion to the European War. A final assault where the Red Army stormed the Nazi capital and forced Germany's unconditional surrender. By April 1945, Soviet forces massed on the Oder River, less than 60 miles from Berlin, preparing for a blow that would end the conflict in Europe. Stalin unleashed nearly 2.5 million troops, over 6,250 tanks and more than 41,000 artillery pieces in a multi-front attack that dwarfed anything seen before. The German defence, a patchwork of exhausted Wehrmacht remnants, SS units, Volkssturm militia and even Hitler Youth, numbered around 900,000 but was stretched thin, short on fuel and battered by years of attrition. The assault opened on April 16, 1945, with the largest artillery barrage of the war, shaking the Silo Heights east of the city. Soviet divisions advanced through mud and rubble, overcoming fierce resistance in the suburbs before encircling Berlin by April 25, 1945. Inside the city, the fighting turned into a brutal block-by-block struggle. Combat engineers blasted through barricades, tanks rumbled down shattered boulevards, and infantry stormed buildings under constant shell fire. Civilian casualties soared as the front lines shifted from street to street. In the final days, as Soviet troops closed on the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler took his own life on April 30, 1945, in his underground bunker. His death signalled the end. On May 2, 1945, General Weidling surrendered the city to Soviet General Chuikov. 5 days later, on May 7, 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender, ending the war in Europe. The red flag was raised over the Reichstag, a symbol of total Allied victory and the utter collapse of the Nazi regime. The Battle of Berlin was decisive not just for its scale and ferocity, but because it extinguished the last hope for German resistance and set the post-war order in Europe. From the fall of France to the fall of Berlin, the arc of the war traced Germany's overreach and the long, grinding Allied reversal, driven by manpower, industry, and sacrifice. These are the 10 most decisive battles of the Second World War in the European theatre, ranked in chronological order, each one a moment where the trajectory of the conflict shifted or was confirmed. Together they decided the fate of a continent and shaped the world that followed. Across all 10 battles, one pattern stands out. Military dominance is never permanent. German speed and daring shattered Europe's balance in months, but overreach, attrition and Allied coordination slowly reversed every gain. The fate of the continent turned on the sacrifice and resilience of millions. These battles prove that the course of history hinges not on invincibility, but on endurance. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on which battle you think was most decisive.